There is a place that exists only in the hush between waking and dreaming. A place where the world slows, where the tick of a clock grows distant, where the weight of the day dissolves like candle smoke rising into the dark vault of a cathedral ceiling. Tonight we travel, not to a castle on a cliff, not to the torchlit corridors of a stone fortress, but to a place just as layered, just as hidden, just as rich with secret lives and unspoken kingdoms. We go to the suburbs. Not the suburbs as they are remembered in photographs and television reruns, bright and cheerful and uncomplicated. We go to the suburbs as they truly were, as they existed in the long, slow hours when no one was watching, in the quiet kitchens at 3 p.m, in the back gardens in early autumn, in the careful, deliberate choices made behind closed doors, in rooms where the curtains were always drawn just so. It is the 1970s. The decade hangs in the air like the smell of a wood fire, warm and a little smoky, laced with something you cannot quite name. The world outside is changing. It is always changing. But here, in these rows of houses with their trimmed hedges and their attached garages and their pale brick faces turned toward the street, there is a stillness that feels almost medieval in its endurance. And in this stillness, behind these ordinary walls, women are living secret lives. If you enjoy listening to stories like this, subscribe. I post new stories every week. Not secret in the way of spies or criminals, secret in the older, deeper sense, the way that medieval peasant women kept their knowledge of herbs and healing behind the walls of their silence, the way that abbesses kept their correspondence from bishops who would not approve, the way that all people in all times have kept some small, vital part of themselves hidden from the world that would diminish it if it knew. We're going to walk slowly into this world tonight. We're going to sit down in these kitchens, linger in these gardens, follow these women through their days, and as we do, you will find that the world grows quieter around you. The light will soften, the air will cool, and sleep will come, as it always comes, gently and without insistence, like dusk settling over a long autumn afternoon. Close your eyes if you like, or let them grow heavy, unfocused, turned inward. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nowhere you need to be. The story will carry you. Let it begin. Think of the suburb as a kind of medieval village, and it will begin to make sense in ways it never did before. In the Middle Ages, the village was the whole world for most of the people who lived in it. There was the church at the centre, the Lord's house on the hill, the common land where animals grazed, and the cottages arranged along the single main road that wound through and out into the wider world that most people would never see. The village had its customs, its hierarchies, its unspoken laws. It had its gossip networks and its rivalries, its alliances and its quiet enmities, and it had, above all, its sense of enclosure, the feeling that the hedge and the ditch and the familiar row of thatch-roofed buildings marked the boundary of the known world. The suburb of the 1970s was not so different. It had its own topography of power, just as clearly delineated as any medieval manor. The corner house with the large garden and the car that was always clean, that was the Lord's Hall in its way. The house with the peeling paint and the broken fence post, that was the cottage at the edge of the village, the one that everyone noticed and no one helped with. The school at the top of the hill, the church on the high street, the row of shops with their small awnings. These were the institutions that gave the landscape its meaning, just as surely as the mill and the smithy gave meaning to a village in 1340. Walk with me through this world now slowly, as if for the first time. It is a Tuesday morning in September of 1973. The air carries the first suggestion of autumn, a coolness at the edges, a smell of turned earth from the gardens, the faint sweetness of apples from the tree in the garden at number 14. The skies are pale, soft grey, the kind that promises nothing dramatic, only a long, quiet day. The street is called Hawthorne Close, and it curves in a gentle arc of 22 houses, all built in the same decade, all wearing the same pale brick faces, all separated from their neighbours by fences of varying heights and styles. The height of a fence being, in this particular kingdom, a measure of something that could not be politely discussed. The high fence said, "I am private." The low fence said, "I am friendly." The fence of exactly medium height, which was the most common, said, "I have thought carefully about what I am saying with this fence, and I have chosen to say nothing definitive." The gardens are still largely in their summer state. the roses finishing, the dahlias reaching their final blaze of orange and red, the lawns showing the first yellowing of the season. But there are signs, if you look, of the shift underway. The first leaves have fallen from the silver birch at number 8, lying yellow and perfect on the dark grass below. The hydrangeas have gone papery, their great flower heads the colour of old linen. The smell of earth is stronger in the morning now, richer, the way the earth always smells when it is preparing for something. The houses face each other across a road wide enough for 2 cars to pass, with a narrow pavement on each side. In the medieval village, the road was the artery, the place through which all life moved. Here too the road is alive with meaning. The position of a car in a driveway, the timing of curtains opening, the angle at which a bin has been left, out on the pavement all day, or brought in before noon, as a responsible householder should. Notice how few people are visible, even now at 9:30 in the morning. The men have gone, most of them at any rate. They left at 7:30 or 8, in their cars or walking to the station at the far end of the high street, briefcases in hand, faces still carrying the careful blankness of men who have learned to carry blankness as a kind of armour. The children went earlier, at 8:15, trailing school bags and sports kits, their voices the last noise of the morning before the street settled into its daytime quiet. And now it is quiet. The suburb in its daytime quiet is a very particular kind of quiet. It is not the silence of the countryside, which is full of birds and wind and the distant sound of farm machinery. It is not the silence of the night, which is soft and total. It is a silence that is inhabited, a silence in which you are aware, always, of the life just the other side of the walls. The television from number 7, muffled through brick and glass. The washing machine at number 11, vibrating faintly through the ground. The baby at number 16, who cries at 11 and at 2, and sometimes for no discernible reason at all, its voice rising and falling and rising, and then, at last, subsiding. This is the world in which the women live, during the long middle hours of the day. It is a world that looks simple from the outside, a row of ordinary houses on an ordinary street in an ordinary English or American or Australian suburb. But walk past slowly enough, and you will begin to notice the things that the surface does not show, the net curtain that moves, just slightly, as you pass number 19, the light in the back bedroom at number 5 that is always on, even in the afternoon, the sound of typing from the back room at number 12, a sound so regular, so deliberate, so unlike anything that typing should be doing in a house like this at this time of day, that you slow your pace slightly without meaning to. There are kingdoms here, behind these walls, small, quiet kingdoms, with their own rules and their own rituals and their own geography of rooms, and in each of these kingdoms there is a woman who has built something, or is building something, or is dreaming of building something in the space that the world has left her. We are going to visit some of them tonight. We are going to sit with them for a while in their kitchens and their back gardens and their upstairs rooms, and we are going to understand, slowly and without hurry, what it was that they were doing in the hidden hours of their ordinary days. But first, the light. In the medieval world, the quality of light defined the texture of the day. The rough yellow flicker of a tallow candle, throwing unsteady shadows across a stone wall, the cold grey light of a November morning through an unglazed window, the sudden, gorgeous warmth of sunlight through coloured glass in a cathedral, a moment so rare and so beautiful that people who saw it for the first time sometimes wept. The light of the 1970s suburb has its own qualities, and they are worth attending to because they set the mood of everything that happens inside them. The morning light comes in from the east, through the kitchen windows that face the back garden, and it is a gentle, indirect light in September, not the sharp gold of summer, but something softer, the colour of weak tea held to the window. It lies across the kitchen table in a long oblong, catching the steam from the kettle, making the everyday objects of a kitchen, the teapot, the butter dish, the stack of library books that have been sitting on the corner of the table for a week now, seem briefly, quietly beautiful. By mid-morning the light has shifted. It is overhead now, coming through the skylight in the hall at number 12, throwing a perfect square of white light onto the hallway carpet. The carpet is orange and brown and white, a pattern that was fashionable 3 years ago and already looks slightly tired, but in this light right now it looks like stained glass, like something a medieval craftsman might have laboured over. In the afternoons the light comes from the west, And in the living rooms on the west-facing side of the street, it fills the room with a warmth that is almost unbearable in its beauty and its briefness. The women who live in these rooms know it. They arrange their afternoons around it, not consciously, not with any explicit intention, but in the way that all people arrange their lives around the small, recurring gifts of the world they inhabit. The cup of tea at exactly the right temperature, the particular chair that catches the afternoon sun. And then the evening comes, and with it the lights that the women choose to turn on, and the choice of lights is itself a kind of language. The overhead light in the kitchen, harsh and functional, the lamp in the corner of the living room gentle and warm, the reading light clipped to the headboard of the bed in the spare room, throwing a small circle of brightness in which something, a book, a letter, a notebook, is being attended to with great care. We will return to that reading light, it has a story to tell. But for now, let us simply be here, in the physical world of the suburb, in its quiet streets and its pale brick walls and its gardens turning toward autumn. Let us breathe it in, the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves, the faint sweetness of chrysanthemums and coal smoke, the clean, cold edge of morning air. You are here, you are present. The world is slow and quiet around you. Let the images settle, let them become the texture of a dream. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, the day was divided by the canonical hours, the bells that rang 7 times between the first light and the last, calling the monks and nuns to prayer at regular intervals throughout the day and night. Matins in the deep dark before dawn, lauds at first light, prime at 6 in the morning, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline, each hour a punctuation mark in the long sentence of the day, a moment to pause and remember what the day was for. The suburban women of the 1970s had their own canonical hours, though no bell called them to prayer. 7 o'clock in the morning was the first hour, the hour of the alarm, of the children being woken, of the kettle going on and the toast being made and the kitchen filling with the organised chaos of the morning departure. This was the most medieval hour of the day, in a sense, the hour of obligation, of necessity, of the roles that could not be set aside. The mother, the wife, the manager of the morning, the one who knew where the gym kit was, and whether there was enough milk, and what time the dentist appointment was that no one had remembered to put in the diary. There was skill in this work, as there was skill in all the invisible labour of the medieval household. The running of a medieval manor required the same kind of knowledge of stores and schedules and the particular needs of particular people, held in the mind and acted on constantly, without acknowledgement or ceremony. A good châtelaine, the mistress of a medieval household, was worth her weight in practical intelligence, though the records rarely noted her by name. The women of Hawthorne Close were châtelaines of their own small manors. By 8:30 the men and children had gone, and the first hour of private time began. Think of that phrase for a moment, private time. In the medieval world, true privacy was almost unknown. Even in the wealthiest households, even in the most carefully arranged domestic arrangements, people were rarely alone. Servants, family members, guests, visitors. The medieval house was a porous social space, with people moving through it constantly. The idea of a room of one's own, of time truly belonging to one person, was a luxury so rare as to be almost inconceivable for most people. The suburban woman had, in theory, more of it. The house was her own. The children were at school, the husband was at work. She had, by the standards of almost any previous era in human history, an extraordinary amount of solitude. And what she did with it was, in some cases, the most interesting thing about her. Begin with Margaret at number 6. Margaret is 41 years old. She has 2 children, Robert, 14, and Jane, 11, and a husband named David who works in insurance and plays golf on Saturdays, and is not unkind, but is also not, in any deep or meaningful way, present. He is there in the evenings, eating his dinner and watching the news, but he is not really there, not in the sense that matters, not attending, not curious, not asking the questions that would require real answers. By 8:45 on a Tuesday morning, Margaret has washed the breakfast dishes, wiped down the kitchen table, put on the first load of washing, and made herself a second cup of tea. She has done all of this without thinking about it, her hands moving through the familiar motions of the morning routine the way the hands of a medieval scribe move through the familiar motions of copying a manuscript. Not absent-mindedly, but without needing to think. The body knows what to do. She carries her tea to the small table in the back bedroom, the one the family calls the spare room, though they have no spare people to put in it. She sits down, she opens the drawer in the small table, and she takes out a notebook. The notebook is ordinary. A spiral-bound pad with a blue cover, the kind sold in the stationery aisle of the supermarket for 20 pence. But inside it, in Margaret's careful, slightly leftward-leaning handwriting, are 163 pages of something that is not a diary, not quite a journal, but something in between. A record of the things she is thinking about, the things she is reading, the things she dreams about in the night, and cannot talk about in the day. There is a passage written 3 weeks ago about the nature of time, about how it feels different in different parts of the day, thick and slow in the mornings, rushing and thin in the late afternoon, vast and strange in the hour after midnight when she sometimes wakes and lies in the dark listening to the breathing of the house. She has been reading a library book about physics, which she got out under the pretext of helping Robert with his homework, and some of what she's read about the relativity of time has struck her as not entirely metaphorical. She writes, "The afternoon light is different from the morning light, not just different in direction and colour, but different in quality, in the sense that it makes. I think time actually moves differently in different lights. This is not mysticism. This is just paying attention." She reads this over, crosses out the last sentence, writes instead, "This is just what it feels like from the inside." She drinks her tea. Outside the window, the apple tree in the garden is still holding most of its fruit. The apple's small and hard and tart-looking, still a week or two from falling. A blackbird lands on the highest branch, looks around with the quick, decisive intelligence of blackbirds and is gone. Margaret writes for 45 minutes, every morning, without exception. She has done this for 7 years since the day Robert started school, and she found herself, for the first time in his life, alone in the house for 6 hours. She did not know, that first morning, what she was going to do with the time. She had expected to feel relief. She had felt, instead, a kind of vertiginous freedom. The same feeling, she imagines, that a bird must feel when the door of the cage is opened and the world outside turns out to be very large indeed. She had sat down at the kitchen table and written 2 pages in an old exercise book she found in Robert's school bag. She could not have told you, that first morning, what she was writing about. She had simply written. The sensation of the morning, the smell of the garden, something she had been meaning to think about for years and had never quite found the time for. 7 years later, she has filled 11 notebooks. She does not think of herself as a writer. The word feels too large, too public, too much like a declaration she's not earned the right to make. She thinks of herself as someone who writes, a smaller, more domestic thing, a thing that takes place in a back bedroom on a Tuesday morning and makes no claim on anyone else's attention. But in this too she's more medieval than she knows. In the scriptorium of a 12th century abbey, a nun named Hildegard was writing down the visions she had been receiving since childhood, visions of light and sound and theological complexity that her confessor, Volmar, helped her to translate into Latin and eventually into the extraordinary books that would make her famous. But for years before the books, there was just the writing, the private record, the morning practice, the careful notation of the things that no one else could see. Most medieval women who wrote left no record of it. The writing was private, local, functional, notes in the margins of books, letters, accounts, prayers. The writing that survived was the writing that was deemed worthy of preservation, which was not usually women's writing, but the writing happened. It was always happening in the spaces and the hours that the world allowed. The world of the suburb allowed the hours between 9 and 3. Now move with me down the street, past the silver birch at number 8, past the house with the high fence and the smell of something baking, bread, or perhaps a cake, the warm and flowery sweetness of it drifting over the fence on the September air, to number 12. Number 12 is the house with the sound of typing. The woman at number 12 is Patricia, who is 37, and who types because she is writing a novel. She has been writing a novel for 3 years. It is set in a mining village in South Wales in the 1920s, and it's about 3 sisters, and it is good, better, fact, than she knows, because she has no one to tell her, and the absence of readership has made her doubt it constantly, even as she goes on writing it, even as the story grows more complex and more assured with every chapter. Patricia types on a portable typewriter, a blue Olivetti that sits on a table in the back room, a room that was supposed to be a study for her husband Gerald, but has gradually over the years been colonised by her. Not in any dramatic way. Gerald's books are still on the shelf, his golf trophies still on the windowsill, but the table is hers now, and everyone in the house knows it without anyone having said so. The sound of the typewriter is the sound of something that the suburb does not quite know how to accommodate. It is not the sound of housework, not the Hoover, not the washing machine, not the sounds of productive domestic industry. It is the sound of something else, something that does not fit comfortably in the category of things a woman of 37 with 2 children and a husband in middle management should be doing at 10 o'clock in the morning. Patricia does not care most of the time. She types for 2 hours every morning, from 9 until 11, with a cup of coffee that goes cold beside her, and a packet of biscuits she intends to eat sparingly but rarely does. She types quickly when the words come and slowly when they don't, but she always types, always puts something on the paper, even on the bad days when everything she writes feels thin and wrong and nothing like the novel she carries in her head. She has learned, over 3 years, that the bad days are not the enemy of the good days. They are part of the same process, like the cold mornings that make the warm afternoons possible. She has told almost no one about the novel. Her mother knows, and has twice asked if she's finished it yet in a tone that implies the whole enterprise is a phase that Patricia will eventually grow out of. Her friend Sheila, who lives in the next street, knows, and has responded with a warmth and a practical curiosity, asking about the characters, asking what happens, that Patricia finds both encouraging and terrifying, because it makes the novel suddenly real, in a way it isn't when it exists only on paper in a back room in a semi-detached house. Gerald does not know, or rather, Gerald knows in the way that people know things they have decided not to attend to, a kind of willful peripheral vision that keeps the thing in sight without making it central. This is not, in the medieval understanding, unusual. The lives of women in the medieval world were conducted in a space of sanctioned invisibility that is hard to comprehend today. Not invisibility in the sense of being ignored. Women were seen, were noticed, were commented on constantly. But their inner lives, their ambitions, their private work, this was invisible not because it was hidden, but because it was not considered to exist. A woman who was keeping a household could not also be keeping a manuscript. The two things could not, in the medieval imagination, occupy the same person at the same time. And yet they did, they always did. Patricia types another sentence, crosses out 2 words, types them again differently. The morning light lies across the keyboard. The garden outside the window has gone still, a stillness that is particular to mid-morning in early autumn, when the birds have finished their first busy hour and the world holds its breath before the next thing happens. She reads back what she has written. A scene in a kitchen in 1921, a woman making bread, her hands working the dough while her mind is somewhere else entirely. It is, Patricia thinks, one of the best things she has written. She does not know, sitting here on a Tuesday morning in 1973, in a suburb whose name will never appear in any history of literature, that the novel will be published in 1979. She does not know that it will be reviewed as a quiet masterpiece in 2 literary journals and a national newspaper. She does not know any of this. She knows only the sentence, and the next sentence, and the cold cup of coffee, and the apple biscuit she's eating without noticing, and the sound of the blackbird in the garden. She types. Outside, a car passes slowly down the road. A woman with a shopping basket walks by on the pavement, shoes clicking on the concrete. A cloud passes across the sun, and the light changes, and the room grows briefly darker and then bright again. The morning continues, the canonical hours pass, and the suburb holds its secrets, as it always has, as it always will. In the great tapestries of the medieval world, the figures in the foreground are always the ones you recognise. The kings on their thrones, the knights in their armour, the bishops with their gold-stitched vestments. They are large and named and located at the centre of the design, and they are supposed to be the story. But the medieval tapestry makers knew something that the people who commissioned the tapestries sometimes did not. The real interest, the real life of the piece, is in the background, in the figures who are smaller and less named and set to one side, engaged in activities that are not the official subject of the tapestry, but are far more vivid. The woman picking apples in the corner, her skirt hitched up, her expression concentrated and private. The girl watching from the doorway of a building that may be a house or maybe a shop. The servant carrying a dish toward a table, her face in three-quarter view, her eyes fixed on something outside the frame. The women of Hawthorne Close are the background figures of the tapestry of their time. They are not in the foreground. Their names do not appear in the newspaper. Their work, the work they do in the spaces the world has left them, is not what the world considers work. And yet they are the most interesting people in the picture. Let us meet them properly. There is Margaret at number 6, who we have already visited. Margaret with her spiral-bound notebook and her back bedroom and her 7 years of private writing. Margaret, who was a librarian before she married, and still reads with the particular intensity of someone who has been trained to notice what books are really about. Margaret, who knows that the Dewey Decimal System is a way of imagining the whole world as something that can be organised and found and retrieved, a reassuring fiction that she both believes in and quietly mistrusts. Margaret's particular secret is the writing, but it is also, more broadly, the thinking. She's a person of great intellectual curiosity living in a context that does not, by and large, reward intellectual curiosity in a woman of her age and station. She has found ways around this. The library, the notebook, the long walks she takes on Wednesday afternoons, when she uses the time to think about whatever she's been reading or writing, and does not feel obliged to account for the time to anyone. But the ways around are always just ways around. The thinking happens in the spaces between, not in the centre of things, and this is a loss, not a tragedy, not a crisis, but a quiet chronic loss, like the low-grade ache of a joint that was injured years ago and never quite healed. She does not think about it in these terms. She's not, on the whole, a person given to grievance. But on certain mornings, when she has written something that she knows is true and good and that will never be read by anyone who could say so back to her, she feels the loss as a specific weight in the chest, a brief heaviness that she has no name for and does not try to name. She drinks her tea, she closes her notebook, she goes downstairs to put on the second load of washing. Then there is Dorothy at number 3, who is 52, and whose children have left and whose husband Trevor retired 2 years ago and took up bird-watching, which requires him to leave the house before dawn several mornings a week and spend the remaining mornings telling Dorothy about what he saw. Dorothy's situation is different from Margaret's. Her privacy has been invaded not by the routine of family life, but by the sudden presence of a retired husband, which is a peculiarly modern version of a problem the medieval world would have recognised. The lord of the manor having returned from a long absence, needing to be accommodated in a household that had, in his absence, developed its own rhythms and its own governance. Dorothy has, in fact, been running her own small business for the past 4 years. She makes and sells hand-embroidered items, cushion covers, table runners, framed pieces, through a small network of craft fairs and a catalogue she prints herself on the duplicating machine at the church hall. She brings in, on average, £12 a week, which she keeps in a bank account that Trevor does not know about. This is not a secret she keeps out of deception. It is a secret she keeps because the alternative of telling Trevor, of the conversation that would follow, of the expression on his face as he tried to compute what to do with this information, is one she has evaluated and found too costly. Trevor is not a bad man. He would not, she thinks, object. He might even be proud. But he would need to be involved. He would have opinions about pricing and marketing and the selection of craft fairs. He would want to help. And Dorothy has found, in 4 years of running this very small business entirely on her own initiative, that help of the Trevor variety is not help she wants. She is embroidering at this very moment, sitting at the kitchen table with her hoop and her silks, the television on in the background with the sound turned down, a cup of tea at her elbow. She's working on a piece commissioned by a woman in Chelmsford who wants a picture of a hedgerow for her daughter's birthday. Blackberries and hawthorn berries, the russet brown of turning leaves, a small wren almost hidden in the tangle of branches. Dorothy is an extremely good embroiderer. She has a feeling for colour and composition that comes from somewhere she has never been able to trace. Not from her mother, who sewed only out of necessity, not from any formal training. It is just something she can do, the way some people can hear a tune once and play it back without effort. Her fingers know the angle of the stitch before her mind has finished deciding. She is thinking, while she embroiders, about the conversation she had last week with the woman who runs the craft fair in Market Deeping. The woman had asked her, casually between customers, standing with their cups of tea in the draughty hall, whether Dorothy had ever thought about teaching. There was demand for embroidery classes, the woman had said. People wanting to learn the basics, or to develop a specific skill. Dorothy could charge £2.50 per person per session, and they could use the church hall on Thursday evenings. Dorothy has been thinking about this every day since. She is thinking about it now, the needle moving through the fabric with its familiar small resistance, the blackberry taking shape at the edge of the hedgerow. She's thinking about what it would mean to stand in front of a group of people and teach them something she knows, about what it would feel like to be the person who knows, rather than the person who assists, who facilitates, who makes the space for others to do the important thing. She pulls a length of silk through the fabric. The wren is almost done, a tiny, precise thing, its eye a single French knot of darkest brown. In the medieval world, craft knowledge was precious and carefully guarded. The guild system existed precisely to control the transmission of skill, to ensure that the knowledge of a goldsmith or a weaver or a mason remained within a defined group of people who had the authority to pass it on and the right to benefit from it. Women existed largely outside this system. The craft knowledge of women, spinning, weaving, embroidery, the making of cloth and clothing, was transmitted informally between mothers and daughters and neighbours in the private spaces of the home. Dorothy's knowledge comes from exactly this chain of transmission, and it is just as real and just as rare. She has spent 40 years developing a skill that she has given away, mostly for the price of a craft fair table and a catalogue that cost her £2.50 to print. She's going to say yes to the classes. She has already decided, really, and she just hasn't told herself yet. She finishes the wren. She holds the piece at arm's length and examines it. The hedgerow is beautiful, alive with the particular light of an autumn afternoon, the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look like they are being seen for the last time. She starts on the hawthorn berries, which will take the rest of the morning. And then there is Carol at number 17, who is 28, and is the youngest woman on Hawthorn Close, and the one the others think they understand best, because she is young and blonde and wears jeans and platform shoes, and is clearly modern in a way that the others, in their late 40s and 50s, feel they no longer are. Carol married her husband Paul 3 years ago. They have a 2-year-old daughter named Emma, who's at the childminders on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday mornings, which gives Carol 6 hours a week that are entirely her own. In 6 hours a week, Carol is training to be a counsellor. She's studying by correspondence course, a thick folder of course materials that lives in the bottom of the wardrobe under a stack of Christmas wrapping paper, not because she's ashamed of it, but because the bottom of the wardrobe is simply the only place in the small house where something can live without being encountered daily by Paul, who would not disapprove but would ask questions. The kind of questions that are perfectly reasonable, but that require Carol to explain something she is not yet ready to explain, because she is not yet sure herself what she is doing. What she is doing, as best she can articulate it to herself, is this. She is preparing. For what exactly, she cannot say. For a future that looks different from the present. For work that matters to her in a way that the part-time receptionist job she held before Emma does not. For a version of herself that she can see clearly in her mind but cannot yet quite reach. The correspondence course is the path toward it. She studies in the mornings at the kitchen table with Emma's toys still on the floor and the smell of last night's dinner still faintly in the air, reading about Carl Rogers and active listening and the therapeutic relationship, making notes in the margins in her looping, forward-leaning handwriting. She is good at this. She has always been good at this, at listening, at attending, at the particular quality of presence that makes people feel seen. Her friends have always told her their troubles. She has always known what to say, or rather, what not to say, which is the hard thing. She has never had a name for this until now. Reading Rogers in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, she finds that the things she has always done instinctively have a name and a theory, and a body of knowledge behind them, and the recognition is both exhilarating and, in some quiet way, vindicating. She turns a page. Emma's rubber duck is under the table, its painted smile undiminished. Outside the kitchen window, the garden is full of September light. Carol studies for 2 hours. Then she closes the folder, puts it away, and goes to pick up Emma. The women of Hawthorne Close, the background figures in the tapestry, each of them keeping in the hours between 9 and 3 a small and vital flame. In the medieval calendar, the great feast days were the punctuation of the year. Michaelmas and Christmas and Easter and the feast of John the Baptist, each one a gathering point around which the community organised itself, reasserted its connections, renewed its sense of who it was. The feast was not simply eating and drinking, it was also politics, ceremony, the visible manifestation of the social order, and, underneath all of that, the persistent human need to be together in a warm room. On the third Thursday of every month, the women of Hawthorne Close gathered for what they called, without irony, a coffee morning. It was held on a rotating basis at different houses, which meant that every few months each woman was required to open her home, to offer biscuits and coffee or tea, and to preside over 2 hours of conversation that was partly social, partly informational, and partly something else. Something harder to name. Something that functioned more like the meeting of a guild or the chapter of a nunnery than like a social visit. The coffee morning had rules, as all such gatherings do, though none of them were written down and most of them had never been explicitly articulated. The rules were, do not talk about money. Do not talk about your children in a way that implies they are better than other people's children. Do not cry unless something has actually happened, an illness, a death, a genuine crisis, in which case you may cry briefly and will be attended to with warmth and efficiency and then tea. Do not discuss politics except obliquely, through the coded language of prices and shops and things that aren't what they were, which is its own form of political discourse. Do not above all appear to be anything other than fine. This is the great code of the coffee morning, the code that has been in operation in women's gatherings since long before coffee was discovered, the performance of fineness, the maintenance of the social fabric through the collective pretense that everything is manageable, and the equally important signal system, the slight hesitation before fine, the pause before nothing to complain about, that allows women who know each other well enough to hear when someone is not fine at all. It is October now, a Thursday, and the coffee morning is at Dorothy's house at number 3. Dorothy has put out the good cups and the chocolate digestives, and a plate of small sandwiches that she has cut into triangles, which is more formal than the occasion strictly requires, but which she cannot help doing, because the provision of food is for Dorothy a form of love, and she cannot do it carelessly. There are 6 women present. Dorothy, 52, with her embroidery project on the side table, and her bank account and her yes to the Thursday evening classes, which she announced last week, and which has been the talk of the Close in a quiet, approving way that pleases her more than she expected. Margaret, 41, sitting in the armchair by the window with her tea, listening with the particular attentiveness of someone who is always, even at coffee mornings, collecting material. Not consciously. She is not, she would say, taking notes. But things enter her memory here and reappear later in the spiral-bound notebook, transformed into something else, something that belongs to no one in particular, but carries the echo of all of them. Carol, 28, sitting on the floor beside the coffee table with her legs folded, which is the kind of thing only Carol can get away with, the kind of ease in a room that very young people have and lose gradually as the years teach them that ease is something to be earned and guarded rather than simply expressed. Then there is Susan at number 9, who is 45 and whose husband Raymond is often away on business, and who has, in Raymond's long absences, become someone slightly different from the person she was when he was present, quieter and more self-sufficient and more attentive to her own preferences, which she had not previously known she had. Susan is thinking about going back to university. She's 45. The thought seems, on some days, absurd. On other days it seems like the only sensible thing she has ever thought. And there is Helen at number 20, who is 33 and is currently at the crisis point of her marriage. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way that ends in raised voices or broken crockery, but in the slow, quiet way that is harder to name and harder to resolve. Helen and her husband Michael have, over the past 2 years, drifted apart in some way that she finds impossible to describe, like 2 boats that were moored to the same jetty and have moved without anyone intending it to different parts of the harbour. And there is Jean at number 1, who is 60, the oldest woman on the Close, whose children are fully grown and whose husband died 4 years ago, and who therefore occupies a different position in the social ecology of the close, the position of the widow, which carries its own particular mixture of freedom and sorrow and social ambiguity. Jean gardens. She gardens with the same seriousness that other people bring to careers, and her garden is the best-kept garden on the close, and everyone knows it, and she knows that everyone knows it. And this gives her a quiet satisfaction that she would not trade for anything. They settle. Dorothy pours coffee. The conversation begins. It begins, as it always begins, with the practical and the immediate. The new speed bump at the end of the road, the planning permission for the extension at number 15, the fact that the butcher on the high street has apparently changed the way he cuts his lamb chops, and they are not the same. This is not small talk. This is not the trivial filler that it is sometimes mistaken for. This is the language of the village, the monitoring of the collective environment, the noting of changes and their implications, the negotiation of shared standards and shared concerns. It is the same conversation that women have been having at the well, at the market, at the church door, for all of recorded time. The subject changes, the function does not. From the butcher, the conversation moves, with the easy associativeness of these gatherings, to the question of food in general. The price of things, the way recipes have changed, the surprising goodness of a new cookbook that John has been given by her daughter. This leads by a route that makes perfect sense to everyone present, though it would be difficult to trace afterward, to the question of what people are doing in the evenings, which leads to the question of the television program about women in history that Margaret has been watching, and that she describes now, briefly, and with the particular eloquence she has when she is genuinely interested in something, as astonishing, the way it showed women who had been entirely left out of history doing the things that history was made of. There is a silence after this, not an uncomfortable silence, a thinking one. Susan says, "I've been thinking about going back to university." She has not told anyone this before. The words come out before she has quite decided to say them, in the way that important things sometimes do in rooms where the conditions are right, where the quality of attention is such that the important thing feels safe enough to emerge. The room receives the statement with the particular warmth and seriousness that it deserves. There are questions, genuine, curious questions, not the polite questioning that is really just a form of compliment. What would you study? What would you do with it? Have you looked into it? How does Raymond feel about it? That last question hangs in the air for a moment with its freight of implication. Susan says carefully, "I haven't talked to Raymond about it yet." And the room understands. There is no judgment in it, no exchange of glances, no subtle signalling of opinion. There is simply a collective understanding, held lightly and without discussion, of the particular situation that Susan is in and the particular consideration she is weighing. This is the other thing about the coffee morning, the thing that does not appear in any description of a coffee morning, that would be invisible to anyone who was not present in the right way, which is to say, present with the knowledge of what is not said, which is always the most important knowledge. Margaret refills her tea. Dorothy offers the chocolate digestives around again. The conversation moves on gently to the question of what to do about Christmas, which is only 10 weeks away, and which has, as always at this point in October, the quality of a small approaching tide, not yet urgent, but visible on the horizon and already requiring navigation. Outside the window, Jean's garden is visible across the road, the dahlias still going, remarkable in the October light, the roses cut back to their bare-elbowed stems, the lawn a deep autumn green. It is, by any objective measure, a very ordinary Thursday morning. A group of women in a living room drinking coffee, eating biscuits, talking about things that will not be recorded by anyone, that will not appear in any archive, that will leave no trace beyond the slight warmth they carry home with them when the morning ends. And yet, in the scriptorium of a 12th century convent, the nuns were passing small pieces of parchment between them, notes, observations, the record of things they had noticed and wished to share. This is perhaps the oldest form of communication there is, older than books, older than letters. The note passed in a room, the thing said quietly to the person beside you, the small communication between people who know each other well enough to say the true thing. The coffee morning is the note passed in the room. The true thing, said quietly, in the hour between 9:30 and 11, in a house at number 3 on a close that no one outside it has ever heard of. Dorothy collects the cups. Carol helps her carry them to the kitchen. From the kitchen, the sound of water running, the clink of cups, the low sound of Carol saying something and Dorothy laughing. The morning continues. The October light lies soft and golden across the room. Sleep is very near now if you let it be. The warmth of the room, the quiet voices, the smell of coffee and chocolate digestives and the faint sweetness of the late dahlias through the window. These are the textures of a dream. Let them settle over you. Let the voices grow softer, let the room grow dim. There is nothing to do but rest. In the medieval world, the inner life was mapped with extraordinary precision. Not the inner life in the modern sense, the psychological interior, the unconscious, the network of motivations and defences and needs that we have inherited from Freud and his inheritors. The medieval inner life was a theological landscape, a terrain of virtue and vice, grace and sin. The soul's progress through a world understood as a test and a journey. The medieval person knew, with a clarity we have lost, exactly what they were supposed to want and exactly what they were not supposed to want. And the management of the gap between these two things was the central moral drama of a human life. The women of the 1970s suburb were living in the afterglow of this system, in a time when the theological framework had largely dissolved, but the emotional landscape it had shaped had not. They had been raised in the language of duty and sacrifice and the subordination of private desire to public obligation, language that was not in the 1970s as universal as it had been for their mothers, but that was still present, still operative, still the air they had breathed growing up, and that shaped the way they understood themselves. The inner world of the suburban woman in 1973 is therefore a complex place, layered with belief systems that are not always coherent with each other, haunted by desires that have no sanctioned language yet, navigating a transition that the larger world is undergoing, slowly, painfully, with a great deal of friction, between the old understanding of what a woman was supposed to want and the new understanding that was arriving, in books and radio programs and the conversations of younger women, with the force of something that could no longer be contained. Margaret, sitting in the back bedroom with her notebook, is aware of this transition in a theoretical way. She reads, she follows, she understands the argument, but she's also aware that understanding an argument and inhabiting its conclusions are two very different things, and that she is, in practice, still living in a divided way, writing in secret, thinking privately, presenting to the world a version of herself that is complete, but somehow not whole. She does not experience this as oppression, exactly. The word feels too large, too political, for what is essentially a set of ordinary daily constraints. She experiences it more as a kind of weather, the low-pressure system of other people's expectations, which she has learned to navigate as a sailor learns to navigate the prevailing winds. Not by fighting them, which would be exhausting and mostly futile, but by finding the angles at which you can make progress. The notebook is her angle, the writing is the progress. She has been reading, this week, about a woman called Christine de Pizan, who lived in Paris in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, and who wrote, among other things, a book called The Book of the City of Ladies, in which she imagined a city built entirely for women, a city where women's achievements were recognised, their knowledge valued, their histories told. Margaret found the book in the library, in the section on medieval literature, and has been reading it slowly, in the evenings, with the careful attention of someone who recognises something they did not know they had been looking for. Christine de Pizan wrote in a time of far greater constraint than Margaret's, a time when women's access to education, to public life, to the basic instruments of intellectual agency was hedged about with prohibitions and prejudices that make the constraints of hawthorn clothes look mild by comparison. And yet Christine de Pizan wrote. She wrote prolifically, with intellectual ambition, and with what reads across 6 centuries as a kind of passionate, clear-eyed indignation, not rage, but the steady, precise articulation of things that were wrong and needed to be said. Margaret finds this more comforting than she expected to. She writes in her notebook, Christine de Pizan had a city of ladies in her head. I have a back bedroom. Maybe that's enough. Maybe the geography of the self doesn't have to be a city. Maybe it can be a room, a notebook, an hour in the morning. She reads this back, crosses out the last sentence, leaves the rest. The fears are worth attending to as well, because the fears are part of the inner landscape, and they are not small. The fear of being found out. Not in the sense of being caught in a crime. There is nothing criminal in any of what these women are doing, but the fear of being seen in their full complexity by people who might not be able to accommodate that complexity, and who might, in their failure to accommodate it, diminish it. The fear of Margaret's notebook being found and read by David, who would be baffled, probably, and then careful, in the way that baffled people are careful, and the carefulness would be worse than the bafflement. The fear of Patricia's novel being discovered and thought foolish, not by a publisher, but by Gerald, who would not be unkind but who would not quite know what to do, which amounts to the same thing. These are not dramatic fears. They are quiet, chronic, familiar, the background noise of a life lived in the gap between who you are and who the world expects you to be. The medieval mystic who hid her visions from the priest who would misunderstand them knew this fear. The nun who kept her private thoughts in the margins of a psalter, in handwriting too small for anyone to read across a room, knew this fear. The fear is the price of the secret, and the secret is worth the fear. There is another fear, less specific and more pervasive, that belongs to the time itself, the fear of the future, which in the 1970s had a particular character. The decade was one of transition and uncertainty, economically, politically, culturally. The certainties of the post-war world were dissolving. The jobs that had seemed permanent were revealing themselves as fragile. The social order that had seemed fixed was shifting. There was, in the air of the 1970s, a quality of instability, of things being not quite what they had been, not quite settled into what they would become. The women felt this, each in her own way. Carol, who was young enough to be more excited than frightened by the possibility of change. Dorothy, who had found, in her small embroidery business, a way to build something durable in unstable times. Margaret, who held the uncertainty lightly, turning it over in her mind in the morning writing sessions, not resolving it but making it into something she could think about, which is not nothing. And then there are the hopes. The inner landscape is not only fear, it is also hope, and the hopes are worth dwelling on, because they are luminous and specific, and they reveal the shape of what these women are reaching for. Susan hopes for the university. She has, in the week since she mentioned it at the coffee morning, looked it up properly. The adult education program, the part-time entry route, the courses in English literature that would allow her to do, belatedly, and with no practical justification, the thing she wanted to do at 18, and was talked out of by parents who had different ideas about practicality. She has written for the prospectus. It arrived last week, a thick, glossy catalogue of possibility, and she's read it 3 times and marked 3 pages with folded corners and left it in the drawer of her bedside table, which is, in Susan's house, a place of significance, where she keeps the things that belong most fundamentally to her, the things that are hers alone. She has not yet spoken to Raymond, but she has begun, in a quiet internal way, to believe that she will. Carol hopes for the counselling qualification, and behind that, for the work that will come from it, the practice, the clients, the mornings that belong to something that is hers in a different way from the mornings that belong to Emma. She imagines it sometimes while she's studying, a room somewhere, a chair, a person sitting across from her, the quality of attention that she knows she has and that she has never had a proper place to put. She can see it clearly. It is close enough to taste. Patricia hopes for the novel. Beneath the hope for publication, which is the hope she allows herself to articulate, there is a deeper hope. The hope that the thing she has made is real, is good, is worthy of the attention she has given it. The hope that the years of Tuesday mornings and cold coffee and the patient, difficult work of putting the right words in the right order have resulted in something that will last. Not forever, perhaps, but longer than a Tuesday morning, longer than the ordinary life she's living in the meantime. Dorothy's hope is simpler, and perhaps therefore the most medieval in character. She hopes that the Thursday evening classes will work, that people will come, that she will be good at teaching, that the thing she knows, the thing her hands know, the colour sense, the geometry of the stitch, will be something she can give away without diminishing it, in the way that all real knowledge can be given without loss to the giver. These hopes are quiet and domestic in scale. They do not aspire to change the world. They aspire only to make one small room in the world where the thing they care about can exist and be recognised. In the inner world of a medieval woman, in the inner world, for instance, of a 15th century merchant's wife who was teaching her daughter to read from the family's Book of Hours, in the margins of which she had carefully copied, in her own handwriting, the prayers she found most sustaining, the hope had this same modest, tenacious scale. Not the kingdom, the room, not history, the moment, this Tuesday morning, this September light, this page. Let the inner world settle around you now. Let it grow quiet, as inner worlds do when they are attended to without judgment. The fears and the hopes are both there, in the low, warm light of the self's private geography, neither larger nor smaller than they should be. You are resting in this landscape. You're safe here. The walls of the self are thick as stone, as old as the first woman who kept something in her mind that the world could not see and would not understand, and who found that the keeping of it made her in some essential way more herself. Let your breath slow, let the inner world grow dim, there is nothing to resolve tonight. Rest. The medieval economy was not a single, unified system. It was a collection of interlocking, overlapping, sometimes contradictory systems. The formal economy of the lords and the merchants and the guilds, and alongside it, the informal economy of the small producer, the domestic trader, the woman at the market selling butter or eggs or cloth she had woven herself in the long winter evenings. This second economy was largely invisible to the official record keepers. It did not appear in the tax rolls or the guild registers or the merchant accounts. It left traces only in the occasional court record, the odd letter, the brief notation in a household account, bought eggs from Agnes, 4pence, and yet it was vast. It was, in some regions and periods, the majority of the economic activity by volume if not by value. It was the economy in which most people, and most women, actually lived. The suburban women of the 1970s were operating within a version of this same informal economy. Consider Dorothy's embroidery business. £12 a week on average, modest by any standard, but not nothing. Not nothing when considered as the product of skill and time and knowledge that Dorothy has been developing and deploying for 40 years without pay or recognition. The craft fair table, the printed catalogue, the woman in Chelmsford who pays £6 for the hedgerow panel. This is a market, small and local and informal, but a market nonetheless. A place where value is exchanged for value, where Dorothy's knowledge of silk and colour and the geography of the English hedgerow is translated into a form that someone else can take home and hang on their wall. Dorothy does not think of herself as a businesswoman. The word does not quite fit. It belongs to a different register, a different world. But she is doing what businesswomen do, identifying a product, finding customers, setting prices, managing inventory, the silks kept in a mahogany box on the shelf in the spare room, organised by colour family, a system of such meticulous elegance that she sometimes just opens the box and looks at it, delivering on commissions and banking the proceeds. The bank account is the most radical thing, not because it is unusual for women to have bank accounts. By 1973 they can, and many do, but because it is a bank account that functions as a private reserve, a small but real financial independence in a world that still assumes, in its social and administrative structures, that money flows through the man. Dorothy is not unique in this. Many of the women on Hawthorne Close have, in various forms, their own small economic life running parallel to the household economy. Jean at number 1 sells vegetables from her garden, not formally, not from a stall, but in the way that has always been done in English villages. A note pinned to the gate, a box left on the wall, a price written on a piece of cardboard. Runner beans and courgettes in the summer, leeks and kale and purple sprouting broccoli in the winter, root vegetables in the autumn. The amounts are small, £2 in a good week, but the principle is large. Jean's garden produces food, and food has value, and the conversion of that value into money is an ancient and entirely respectable form of trade. She has also this year started selling packets of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme, mint, all grown in the garden, all dried in the airing cupboard, all packaged in small brown paper packets with a handwritten label. She sells them to the women on the close and to the woman at the health food shop on the high street, who pays her 20p a packet and displays them in a basket by the till. This is not so different from what a medieval woman at the edge of a village might have done. The cultivation and sale of herbs being one of the most consistent economic activities of women across the whole of the medieval period, from the simplest village herb garden to the elaborate physic gardens of the great convents. The knowledge of plants, which ones heal, which ones preserve, which ones flavour, which ones harm, was a form of capital, carefully tended and strategically deployed. Jeanne knows the names of her plants in Latin, which she learned from a book she bought at a jumble sale 10 years ago, and which sits, well thumbed, on the shelf in the kitchen alongside the Delia Smith and the River Cottage cookbook. She knows that lavender is Lavandula angustifolia, and that it has been used in medicine and household management since at least the medieval period. She found this in the book, in a passage about the herb gardens of English monasteries, which she read with the particular interest of someone recognising something they already knew. She tied the lavender packets this morning at the kitchen table, her fingers moving with the familiar efficiency of long practice. The packets are neat and small and smell extraordinary. The summer in them, compressed and preserved, a piece of the garden to carry through the winter. She's taking them to the health food shop this afternoon. She will walk, it is not far, and the October air is fine, that sharp, clear October air that makes every surface look precise and real. She will pass the church and the post office, and the small park where the chestnut trees are dropping their conkers, the bright cases split to reveal the glossy dark brown inside. She will walk in the way that people walked before cars, deliberately, with attention to the route, noticing things. She has been walking this route every week for 4 years. She knows it as a medieval pilgrim knew the Pilgrim Road, its landmarks, its moods in different weathers, the way it changes with the seasons. The chestnut trees in the park, the particular quality of the light on the church tower in the late afternoon, the smell of the bakery on Thursday mornings when they make the bread early. There is a form of wealth in this knowing. It is not the wealth that appears in bank accounts or is measured in material goods. It is the wealth of familiarity and attention, the accumulated knowing of a place, a route, a season, a tree. It is the wealth of someone who has been paying attention for a long time to something that most people pass by without seeing. Jean pauses at the gate of her garden, which is of course the best gate on the close, painted a clean sage green, with a small handwritten notice in a plastic sleeve that says vegetables, Seaback Gate, and looks at what she has grown this year. The dahlias that she mentioned, still magnificent in October, the bean plants, now dried to their papery skeletons on the bamboo canes waiting to be cleared, the brassicas, dark green and solid, standing up to the first frosts with the solidity of things that have been doing this for a very long time. The garden is her work. It is the most visible work she does, the work that everyone on the close can see and admire and occasionally comment on in the slightly complicated way that admiration sometimes is, with the faint aftertaste of something that is not quite envy but is adjacent to it. She does not mind this. She has grown old enough in the 4 years since Bill died and the garden became entirely hers, to understand that the discomfort of others in the face of something well done is not her problem to solve. She picks up her basket, the lavender packets inside wrapped in tissue paper, and sets off down the close. The small economies of these women are moving around the suburb now, as they move every day. The baskets and the bank accounts and the craft fair tables and the note pinned to the gate, all the small threads of exchange and value that constitute the economic life of a place that the official economy considers invisible. In the medieval city, the invisible economy was enormous. In the suburb of the 1970s, it is also enormous, and also invisible and also real. The lavender smells of summer and time and the long warm afternoons of a garden that has been loved for decades. Jean carries it down the street, and the air around her carries the scent, and it lingers for a moment in the spaces she passes through. It is the best kind of currency. The afternoon is cooling now, the October light beginning its early withdrawal, the shadows lengthening across the road. Jean walks. The chestnut trees hold their last leaves. The air is clean and cold and full of the smell of autumn, the particular smell of leaves beginning to compost, of earth that has given everything it has for the year and is now resting, turning inward, preparing for the long, dark, regenerative work of winter. You can breathe this air too. You can feel the October chill on your face, the warmth of the basket handle in your hand, the firm surface of the pavement under your feet. You can hear the chestnuts falling in the park, a soft, random percussion, each one a small, complete sound followed by the silence that closes around it. Walk with Jean for a moment. Let the sound of the suburbs settle around you. The distant car, the dog somewhere behind a fence, the bells of the church at the end of the high street striking 4. 4 o'clock, the light is going, the day is nearly done. Let your breath slow. Let the world grow quiet. The medieval world after dark was a different world from the medieval world by day, not just in the obvious sense of darkness and the shift from work to rest, but in a deeper sense, a moral and psychological sense. The night was the time when the rules of the day relaxed, when the social performance of the daylight hours could be set aside, when the self that had been packaged and presented for the public eye could finally, in the privacy of the sleeping house, exist without performance. It was also paradoxically the time of greatest fear. The medieval night was genuinely dangerous. The darkness was dense in a way that we cannot fully imagine now, unilluminated by streetlights or the constant ambience of electrified cities. The sounds of the night, the animal sounds, the human sounds, the sounds that could not be identified, had a different texture in the dark. Superstition and theology combined to people the night with presences that the day kept at bay. The suburban night of the 1970s was safer than the medieval night in material terms. The streetlights made a warm orange glow in the bedroom curtains. The sound of cars passing was reassuring in its ordinariness. The faint blue flicker of the television from the house across the road, someone watching the late news, the sports results, was, for most people in the houses of Hawthorne Close, not frightening but comforting. But the night still had its particular quality, its loosening of the day's constraints, its invitation to a different kind of existence. Notice how the houses change after dark. From the outside, seen from the road in the hour after 9 o'clock, the houses are boxes of light and dark, the unlit rooms showing as dark rectangles, the lit rooms glowing behind curtains of varying thicknesses. The pattern of light in a house tells a story, if you know how to read it. The light in the upstairs front bedroom, steady and warm, someone reading, or lying awake, or doing what people do in the intimacy of a bedroom. The light in the kitchen, bright and overhead, the washing up, or a late meal, or someone who cannot sleep and has come downstairs for a cup of something hot. The light in the back room, the study, the room where the typewriter is, that small, focused light, burning later than the others, into the 11 o'clock hour. Patricia types in the evening sometimes when the words are good and the house is quiet and Gerald has gone to bed. These are the best sessions, not the disciplined morning sessions which are about quantity and habit and maintaining momentum, but the late evening sessions which happen only when something is happening in the writing, when a scene or a character has come alive in a way that requires being followed wherever it goes. She's working now in the small back room on the scene she half completed this morning, the scene in the mining village kitchen in 1921, the woman making bread, her thoughts going to her oldest daughter, who has gone to London and sends letters that contain everything except what she needs to know. Patricia writes the scene slowly, feeling her way forward. The typewriter clicks in the quiet house. Gerald sleeps. The street outside is empty, the orange streetlight making a soft pool on the pavement. This is the purest time. This is the time that the writing lives for, the silence, the stillness, the sense of the ordinary world having stepped back to allow the other world, the world of the story, to exist fully and without competition. She's not thinking about being a writer, or about the novel as an object in the world, or about publication or recognition or any of the external things that the writing might or might not lead to. She's thinking only about the woman in the kitchen in 1921, the weight of the dough under her hands, the sound of rain on the corrugated iron roof, the smell of yeast and coal fire, and the particular smell of a working house in winter. She types 3 more pages. Then she stops, reads back, and discovers that the scene is finished. It ended where it needed to end, without her quite knowing when the ending came, the way the best endings always do. She covers the typewriter. She turns off the backroom light. She goes upstairs in the dark, careful on the stairs, past the door of the children's rooms, past the humming quiet of the bathroom, and into the bedroom where Gerald is sleeping, his breathing slow and regular as a tide. She slides into bed. The darkness is soft and complete. The warmth of the bed closes around her. She thinks briefly about the scene she has just written, with the particular satisfaction of knowing she has made something that is true to the world she's imagining. Then the thought dissolves, as thoughts do in the dark, and she's only the warmth and the breathing and the soft sounds of the house settling. Across the street at number 6, Margaret is also awake in the dark. She wakes most nights at some point in the small hours, not with anxiety, not with the jagged wakefulness of insomnia, but with a quiet alertness that she has long since learned to accept, and even, in some ways, to welcome. She lies in the dark and her mind moves, slowly and without urgency, through whatever it is currently attending to. Tonight it is moving through the question of Christine de Pizan and the City of Ladies, which she's been reading in the evenings, and which she has found herself continuing to read in the mental way, turning the ideas over, testing them against her own experience, examining the ways in which a woman in the late 14th century and a woman in the early 1970s are both different and, in certain fundamental ways, the same. The same in this, that the space available for the self is always in negotiation with the space claimed by others, that the negotiation is never settled once and for all, but requires constant, quiet, patient maintenance, that the women who manage it best are the ones who find a form, a book, a garden, a notebook, a craft fair catalogue, that allows them to hold what they're keeping without having to defend it. She thinks Christine de Pizan's city was made of words. Mine is made of words too, in the end. A city made of the thing you do when no one is watching, in the time you have carved out from the time that belongs to everyone else. She is not unhappy. This is important to note. She is not lying in the dark, mourning her life or wishing it were different in some broad and irrecoverable way. She is living a life that is, on balance, good, full of people she loves, of beauty she notices, of work that satisfies her even in its constrained and invisible form. But the gap is real. The thing in the notebook is real, and the fact that it is in the notebook and not in the world, not given the room it might deserve, is real. She holds this reality in the dark with the same clear-eyed equanimity with which she holds everything else, not suppressing it, not performing contentment, but simply seeing it for what it is. This is, in the deepest sense, a medieval skill. The medieval mystics called it contemplation, the capacity to hold reality without flinching from it, without needing to change it or escape it, simply seeing it in its full truth and resting in the seeing. Hildegard of Bingen knew this. Julian of Norwich knew this. The woman who sat at the edge of a candle-lit room in the 14th century, looking at the small flame with the full attention of a mind that had learned to be still, knew this. Margaret does not know about Julian of Norwich, not yet. She will find her in the library next spring and will read the revelations of divine love with the same recognition with which she read Christine de Pizan, the feeling of encountering, across centuries, a mind that thinks in ways she recognizes. But tonight she is simply lying in the dark, thinking in the way she always thinks in the dark, and the house is quiet around her, and David is asleep beside her, and outside the window the orange streetlight makes its steady glow, and the suburb is silent under the October sky, its houses arranged in their familiar rows, each one a box of sleeping life, each one containing its secrets, its negotiations, its small and necessary kingdoms of self. Let the night settle over you now. Let the dark be soft and complete. There is nothing to do in the dark but rest. The breathing of the house. The distant dog. The faint creak of a floorboard somewhere. The house adjusting to the cold as houses do in the night, settling into themselves. The orange streetlight warm and steady. The suburb sleeping. You are sleeping too, or nearly. The boundary between waking and dreaming is dissolving, the way it always does in the dark hours, the images becoming less precise, the thoughts less sequential, the world growing very soft around you. Let it go, let the night have you. Sleep is here. There is a quality of light that exists only in the small hours of the morning, in the time between 2 and 4 o'clock, when the world is as close to silence as it ever gets. In the medieval monastery, this was the hour of the night office, the monks and nuns rising in the cold dark to chant the psalms in candlelit choir stalls, their breath visible in the winter air, their voices rising in the ancient syllables of praise and petition. The suburb knows its own version of this hour. At 3 in the morning on a Wednesday in November, the close is completely still. The traffic on the main road, never heavy, has dwindled to nothing. The streetlights are burning their warm orange in an empty street. The houses are dark in all their windows, the curtains drawn, the television set silent, the particular rhythmic machinery of domestic life, the washing machine, the dishwasher, the central heating boiler kicking on and off, all of it stilled. This is the hour of the self's most unguarded existence. In the medieval understanding, the deep night was a time of particular spiritual receptivity, the times when visions came, when the ordinary barriers between the human and the divine thinned, when the dreaming mind could receive what the waking mind was too busy to hear. Whether you share this understanding or not, there is something in it that resonates. The night has a different quality from the day, a receptivity, an openness, a stillness in which things that the noise of the day keeps moving become, briefly, still. Helen at number 20 is awake. She has been awake since 2, lying beside Michael in the dark, listening to his breathing, which is the breathing of someone profoundly and untroubled asleep. She does not begrudge him this. She's not angry. She's simply awake, in the way she's been awake at 3 in the morning several times a week for the past 6 months, with a quality of wakefulness that is less like insomnia and more like being summoned to attend to something. What she is attending to in these dark hours is the question of her life. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of crisis or breakdown, in the quiet, careful way of someone sorting through a complicated drawer, picking up each thing, examining it, deciding what to keep and what to let go of. What to keep? The house, which she loves. The children, obviously. Her friendship with the women on the close, which is more important to her than she had realised until recently. The garden, which she's only just begun to tend properly, having previously left it to Michael, and which is revealing itself in this first autumn of her attention to be full of things she did not know were there. What to let go of? The version of herself that has been performing contentment without experiencing it. The belief that wanting something different is a form of ingratitude. The idea, absorbed somewhere in childhood and never quite examined, that a woman who has everything she's supposed to want has no legitimate claim to wanting anything else. She lies in the dark and she thinks. This is also a medieval skill. The examination of conscience was a practice recommended by every spiritual director in the medieval world. The quiet, candid review of one's interior life, conducted in privacy and without defensiveness, as a way of knowing where one was and what needed attention. Thomas à Kempis, in The Imitation of Christ, wrote about the importance of knowing yourself truly. Not the self that others see, not the self you present in the daylight, but the self that exists in the quiet of the night, when all the day's defences are down. Helen is doing this without knowing it. She's conducting her own examination of conscience in the 3 o'clock dark, and what she's finding, what she's slowly, carefully, and with a great deal of courage beginning to acknowledge, is that the marriage that looks, from the outside, like a perfectly adequate marriage is, on the inside, an incomplete one, not failed, not broken, but not whole, not yet. She does not know, lying here in the dark, what she's going to do with this knowledge. She does not have a plan. She has only the knowledge itself, the small, quiet, irrefutable knowledge of the self in the dark, and the decision to acknowledge it rather than to turn away from it one more time. This is in its own way brave. The medieval mystics knew that the most important decisions were made in the dark, in the quiet, in the stripped-down hour before dawn when the mind was too tired for cleverness and could only speak the truth. Not dramatic decisions, not the decision to go on crusade or to enter a convent, but the quieter, more fundamental decisions. This is what I know. This is what I will no longer pretend not to know. This is where I am. Helen turns over in the dark. Michael breathes. The house holds them both, warm and silent and full of the sleeping life of their children down the hall. She has decided nothing. She has done nothing except see clearly in the dark what has been there all along. This is enough for tonight. Let the dark be peaceful around her. Let the 3 o'clock hour be what it is. The quietest hour, the honest hour, the hour of the self's most private accounting. And let it dissolve, as it always does, into the slow return of sleep, the body drawing the mind back down into its depths, the thoughts growing soft and formless, the darkness becoming not the darkness of wakefulness, but the deeper darkness of true sleep. Sleep. Susan, at number 9, is also in a kind of sleeplessness, Not the honest dark of Helen's 3 o'clock, but the soft, almost waking state of late-night reading. She's been lying with the prospectus, the one from the university, reading the course descriptions with the half-attention of someone already half asleep, but still wanting to be somewhere specific in her mind when she finally lets go. The English literature courses, the names of the texts, the possibility of being at 45 a student again, of being someone who reads for a reason, who thinks about texts with the guidance of people who have thought about them more than she has, who sits in a room with other people and argues about what a novel means. She imagines it with the particular soft-focused clarity of the almost asleep, the room, the chair, the lecturer's voice, which she gives in her imagining, the calm authority of someone who knows what they know and enjoys sharing it. The bus journey to the campus, in the early morning, when she will be one of the people going somewhere with a purpose. She lets the prospectus fall to the duvet. She turns off the reading light. The room is dark. Raymond is asleep. The house is quiet. She will call the admissions office tomorrow. She has decided. It happened somewhere in the last 10 minutes, between the course descriptions and the slow closing of her eyes, without any dramatic moment of decision. Just the gradual settling of the possibility into something that felt like a fact. She will tell Raymond on Thursday. She has found the words already, not in any anxious or rehearsed way, but simply, clearly, I want to go back to university and study English literature. I've been thinking about it for a while and I have decided to do it. Simple, clear, true, the kind of sentence that only becomes available when you have stopped being afraid of saying it. She sleeps. The close is quiet. All the houses sleeping now, all the secrets held safe in their separate rooms, all the private kingdoms dark and still, and full of the breathing life of people who are, each in their own way, in the middle of their own particular journeys. You are part of this quiet now. You are one of these sleeping lives, warm and still and attended to by the same dark that attends to all of them. The November night outside is cold and clear, and somewhere above the orange streetlight the stars are there, though you cannot see them, the same stars that shone over the medieval village and the pilgrim road and the scriptorium where the candle was burning late. The same dark, the same quiet, the same gradual loosening of the day's hold. Let it happen. You are sleeping now, or near enough that the distinction does not matter. The story has carried you here. Rest. The medieval world did not end. This is worth saying plainly, because it sometimes seems, in the histories that record its plagues and its wars and its long, slow dissolution, as if the Middle Ages were always on the verge of extinction, always one bad harvest or one catastrophic death away from ceasing to exist. But the world continued. The harvest failed and the world continued. The kings died and the world continued. The great cathedrals burned and were rebuilt and burned again and were rebuilt again. The plague came and the world contracted, and the people who survived, the majority in most places, in most outbreaks, remade their world in the gap left by the dead, and the world continued. It continues because that is what worlds do. The substrate of human life, the daily rhythms, the tending of things, the transmission of knowledge and care and skill from one generation to the next, is more durable than the dramatic events that try to disrupt it. The castle falls, but the garden is still there. The king is overthrown, but the woman in the village still knows which herbs heal and which harm, and she teaches her daughter, and the daughter teaches her daughter, and the knowledge continues. The suburb of the 1970s continues too. It is December now. The close has put on its winter face. The gardens stripped to their bare bones, the dahlias gone, the lawns grey-green under the short sky. The chestnuts have dropped their last conkers. The beeches have dropped their beech nuts. The silver birch at number 8 is a pure white skeleton against the cold sky, beautiful in its reduction. The houses have their Christmas lights. Some of them, not all. Jean does not do Christmas lights, which is a choice everyone respects. Margaret has a single string of white lights around the front bay window, which David put up without being asked, a small gesture that pleased her more than its scale warranted. Dorothy has, this year, put up a wreath of her own making, twisted hawthorn branches and dried rose hips and a length of red velvet ribbon on the front door, and it is the most beautiful wreath on the close, possibly the most beautiful wreath in the whole of the suburb, and she knows this, and it pleases her deeply. The coffee morning has moved to Jean's this month, because Jean's house is warm and smells of Christmas baking, and because Jean, at 60, has earned the right to host things whenever she wants. She has made mince pies, 12 of them, in proper pastry, made from scratch this morning in the kitchen while the Radio 4 morning programme played, and the grey December light lay across the kitchen table. The women arrive in their winter coats, stamping the cold off their feet in Jean's hall, taking off scarves and unwinding themselves into the warmth of the house. The conversation starts before they are fully settled. There is news. There is always news at the December coffee morning, the year's accumulated events and transitions and small revolutions pressing toward the closing of the calendar with an urgency they don't have in other months. Susan got in. The university accepted her application for the part-time English literature programme starting in January. She tells them this in the hall, still in her coat, her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has had good news and is still discovering all its layers. There is a brief, warm eruption of response. Dorothy hugging her, Margaret saying something quiet and direct that makes Susan laugh, Carol looking genuinely, uncomplicated delighted in the way that young people can. Raymond, Susan tells them, settling into Jean's sofa with her coat finally off, was lovely about it. Surprised, and then, she pauses, searching for the word, thoughtful. He had sat with it for a day and then said simply that he was glad she was doing it, that he thought it was the right thing, and that he would work out whatever needed to be worked out in terms of the evenings. He had then made her a cup of tea, which was not usually a thing he did, and she had found this more moving than she expected. The room receives this with the quiet warmth it deserves. Dorothy's Thursday embroidery classes are going well. She has 6 regular students now, and 2 more on a waiting list. The church hall is warm enough just, and the women come with their hoops and their silks and their varying levels of confidence, and Dorothy teaches them with the same calm authority with which she approaches everything, knowing what she knows, not overstating it, trusting the knowledge to carry its own weight. She has found, in the teaching, something she did not expect to find, the discovery that what she knows is more interesting than she thought. When she has to explain a technique, the mechanics of the satin stitch, the geometry of the pulled thread, she finds herself thinking about it freshly, seeing it from the angle of someone who does not yet understand it, and in doing so discovering dimensions of it she had not previously attended to. It has made her a better embroiderer, which is the oldest paradox of teaching. The student always teaches the teacher. Patricia is on the final section of the novel. She told no one this, not at the coffee morning, not to Sheila, not to anyone, because saying it out loud feels like a temptation of fate, like counting the eggs before the shell is off. But it is true, the 3 sisters have arrived, in the narrative, at the moment she's been working toward for 3 years, a moment of partial reconciliation that is not a resolution, not a happy ending, but the particular kind of ending that is truer than happiness, the moment when the characters see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time, and decide in the light of that clarity to go on. She knows how to write it. She has known for some time. She is saving it, almost, letting it ripen, approaching it on the good mornings with the care of someone who knows that this is the most important scene and will not rush it. She will write it in January, she thinks, the new year, the clean page. Carol has passed her first counselling exam. She has not told Paul yet. She's going to tell him on Christmas Eve, with the results letter in an envelope wrapped in tissue paper, because she has found that the ceremony of the wrapping makes things real in a way that simply saying them does not. She knows this is unusual. She does not mind being unusual. She's thinking about what comes after the qualification, how to structure the practice, whether to rent a room somewhere or to see clients from home, what to charge, how to find the first clients. She has been reading about this in the evenings, in the same spiral-bound notebook she uses for her course notes, in a section she has labelled, with a small private smile, Next Chapter. Next chapter. It is December, and the year is closing, and the world is continuing. In the medieval village, December was the darkest month and also in some ways the richest, the month when the harvest was all in and the stores were full, if the harvest had been good, and the work of the year had been completed and there was time, finally, for the things that were not work, the feast days, the singing, the telling of stories in the firelit hall, the gathering of community around the warmth that the darkness made necessary. this is still true in its way. The suburb in December is a gathering against the dark. The Christmas lights, the mince pies, the coffees in the warm houses, the coats hung in the halls, the darkness that requires warmth, the warmth that the darkness makes possible. Jean brings out the mince pies. The room smells of pastry and cinnamon and the wood smoke from the fireplace, which Jean has lit for the first time this winter, and which is burning with the particular cheerfulness of a fire that is exactly right. Not too large, not too small, the flames moving over the coals in their unpredictable, hypnotic way. Look at the room. 6 women around a fire in December, their coats on the chair by the door, the mince pies on the plate, the cups of tea and coffee cooling in their hands, the voices overlapping and threading and finding their natural rhythms of conversation. This is the oldest picture in the world. Women around a fire, the fire against the dark, the voices, the warmth, the food, the stories. In a cave in the deep past, they were here. In a hall in the medieval century, they were here. In a Victorian parlour, they were here. In a sitting room in a suburban close, on a cold December morning in 1973, they are here. They are always here. They have always been here. The fire burns. The mince pies are passed around. Dorothy brushes pastry crumbs from her skirt with the automatic gesture of someone who has been doing this for a long time and finds it entirely comfortable. Susan says something that makes Carol laugh. Jean refills the teapot and brings it back to the coffee table and sets it down with the small, careful attention she brings to all domestic acts. The attention of someone who has understood, over 60 years, that the care with which you do small things is itself a form of philosophy. The December light lies soft and grey through the window. The fire gives its warmth. The room holds its people, and the people hold each other in the way that rooms and people have always held each other, in the only way the world has ever worked. The world continues. It is always continuing. And in the continuing, in the small persistent dailiness of it, the fire, the teapot, the mince pies, the conversation, all the secret lives are held. All the notebooks and the typewriters and the bank accounts and the correspondence courses and the embroidery and the herb garden and the university prospectus, all the small kingdoms of the self, all the private negotiations, all the things kept safe in the hours between 9 and 3. They are all here in the room, all of it is here. Let the fire warm you, let the voices carry you, let the room be the oldest room in the world, the room where the fire burns against the dark, where people gather because warmth and company are, in the end, all anyone ever needed. The flames move over the coals in their unpredictable, beautiful ancient way. Rest here. You are warm. You are held. Sleep is coming, as gently as December dusk, as soft as firelight on a stone wall. Let it come. The fire is dying down now. Not out, never fully out, not yet. But lower, softer, the flames reduced to the long, slow breathing of coals that have given their heat and are resting in their spent warmth. The room is quieter. The voices have gentled. The December light through the window has gone to the grey of late afternoon, that particular grey that is almost blue, the colour of the hour before dark. Jean is the last one still here, as she usually is, not because the others have left exactly, but because Jean's house has the quality that certain houses have of being easy to stay in, of not requiring anything of you, of simply holding you in its warmth until you are ready to leave. She sits in her chair by the dying fire. The teapot is cold, the mince pie plate holds only crumbs. The room has the particular warmth of a room that has held people and is now settling back into itself. The warmth that is not quite thermal but is something else, something that lingers after the people are gone. Outside on the close, the winter afternoon is doing what winter afternoons do. Deepening, darkening, drawing the day in around itself. The streetlights will come on soon. First one, then another, in that quiet sequential way. The orange light making its familiar pools on the empty pavement. The houses will start to show their lights in the windows. The suburb will settle into its evening self. Jean does not move. She is thinking about nothing in particular, or rather, she's in that state of quiet attention that is not thought, but is better than thought, the state in which the mind rests and the world is simply there, and the simply there-ness of it is enough. The fire, the window, The last light of the December afternoon. The smell of wood smoke and cinnamon and cold air from the front door that was opened and closed several times in the last half hour. She's been here for 60 years in one way or another, in this suburb, in this close, in this house for 22 of them. She has watched the close fill up and change and fill up again. The young families arriving, the children growing, the parents aging, the houses passing from one generation to the next. She has buried a husband and planted a garden and sold her lavender, and watched 5 women she's fond of move, each in their own way, through the years. The world continues. In the medieval world, the lives that were most real, the most lived, the most fully inhabited, were often the lives that the official record did not see. The abbess who ran her convent with the precision of a general and the pastoral care of a priest. The merchant's wife who managed the accounts and the correspondence and the network of suppliers while her husband managed the public face. The widow who kept a farm and raised children and knew, by the end of her long life, the particular patch of earth she had worked as well as any monk knew his scriptures. These lives are gone from the record mostly. They left only traces, a name in a margin, a phrase in a will, a payment in an account. But they were real. They were more real in many ways than the named and recorded lives beside them. The women of Hawthorne Close will leave traces too. Not many, not enough probably, but some. Susan's degree certificate found in a box years later by children who did not know she had gone back. Patricia's novel, on a shelf in a second-hand bookshop in 1993 with a small sticker on the spine. Poetry and Literature, £1.50. Dorothy's embroidery, hanging in a house in Chelmsford, the hedgerow still vivid 20 years after it was made, the wren still present in its corner, its French knot-eye gleaming in the afternoon light. Carol's clients, who will carry her careful attention with them into their lives and pass it on, in whatever way such things are passed on, to the people they love and the work they do. Margaret's notebooks, 11 of them, and eventually 17 and eventually 23, found by her daughter after Margaret is gone, read in one long weekend sitting, and written about, quietly and with great love, in a letter to her own daughter, who will read it many years later in a different century and recognise something. The world continues. Jean gets up to put on the light. The switch clicks. The lamp fills the room with its warm glow. Outside, the first street light has come on. There it is, the orange light, faithful as always, making its small pool on the empty road. She looks out at it for a moment. The close is quiet. The houses hold their secrets and their people and their small kingdoms of self, just as they always have, just as they always will. She draws the curtain. The room is warm. The fire is almost out. The last ember glows red in the dark grate, smaller and smaller, the heat withdrawing slowly into the ash. Smaller. Softer. The ember fades. The room is dark and warm. The suburb is sleeping. You are sleeping too. The world is very quiet now, very still, very soft. The softness of a December night, of a room after the fire has gone out, of a story that has found its ending not in drama or resolution, but in the simple, enduring fact of the world continuing. It continues. You are in it. You are held by it. Sleep. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one.